Never underestimate the power of a stranger's words. When a racist incident unfolds mid-air, what happens next will shock you. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon, and the sun streamed through the porthole windows, illuminating the cramped space filled with a diverse collection of travelers, each lost in their own world. Among them was David, a well-dressed black man in his early 40s, whose confident demeanor contrasted sharply with the trepidation that lingered in the air. He was on his way to a business meeting that could change the trajectory of his career, and as he settled into his seat, he exuded an air of determination. David had spent years climbing the corporate ladder in a predominantly white industry. He had faced countless challenges, not only due to his race but also because of the stereotypes and biases that were often levied against him. Yet, he had always believed in the power of resilience. As he checked his watch, he mentally prepared himself for the pitch that awaited him, a groundbreaking proposal that had the potential to revolutionize the tech industry. With his briefcase beside him, he took a deep breath, readying himself for the presentation he had rehearsed countless times. Seated 2 rows ahead was Sophia Bennett, a white woman in her late 30s who appeared to be the archetype of privilege. She was dressed in designer clothing, her hair perfectly styled, and a sense of superiority radiated from her as she flipped through the pages of a glossy magazine. Sophia had always lived a life cushioned by wealth and status, a world where the struggles of others rarely crossed her mind. Today, she was en route to a spa retreat that promised relaxation and indulgence, and her focus was solely on her own comforts. As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, the cabin crew began their service, offering beverages and snacks. David accepted a glass of water, his mind still racing with thoughts of the meeting. He could see Sophia glancing at him occasionally, her expression unreadable. He had learned to ignore the looks, the subtle, sometimes over judgments that were cast his way. He understood that in some circles, his very presence challenged the status quo. Yet, he remained unfazed, knowing that his worth was not determined by others' perceptions. The flight progressed smoothly until turbulence struck, jolting the passengers from their reverie. As the plane shook, Sophia's composure faltered. She turned in her seat, her eyes wide with panic. In that moment, the veneer of sophistication peeled away, revealing an unsettling vulnerability. David instinctively reached out, his hand hovering just above the armrest, a silent offer of reassurance. To his surprise, Sophia's expression shifted from fear to irritation. "Do you mind?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'd prefer not to be touched by anyone, especially not you." The tension in the air thickened, and several passengers glanced up, sensing the brewing confrontation. David, taken aback, withdrew his hand, feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. He had encountered this type of prejudice before, but each instance felt like a fresh wound. It was an all-too-familiar scenario, where someone believed their perceived superiority gave them the right to demean others. David attempted to brush off the comment, reminding himself of his purpose on the flight. He focused on the business proposal again, but the weight of Sophia's words lingered. As the turbulence subsided, he noticed her whispering to the passenger beside her, her words laced with contempt. The passenger, a young man, nodded, his expression shifting to one of judgment as he glanced back at David. Feeling the intensity of their gazes, David shifted in his seat, trying to reclaim his thoughts. He was determined not to let this interaction derail him. He thought of his daughter, her laughter echoing in his mind, and the promise he had made to her to rise above the hate and ignorance that sometimes permeated society. The plane's captain made an announcement about the remaining flight time, and the familiar cabin ambiance returned. Yet, the damage was done. Sophia's earlier comment had ignited a spark of anger in David, and he felt compelled to stand up for himself. As he gathered his thoughts, he realized that this moment was about more than just a petty insult. It was a microcosm of the larger societal issues he fought against every day. As the flight continued, the scene around David evolved into one of subtle antagonism. The atmosphere grew thicker with unspoken words and glances that cut deeper than any verbal confrontation. Sophia's contempt had awakened a sense of injustice within him, and he could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, gauging his reaction. Some appeared uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, while others leaned in, eager to witness the unfolding drama. The in-flight entertainment system flickered to life, projecting a romantic comedy that momentarily distracted the passengers. Laughter erupted from various corners of the cabin, but for David, the humor felt distant and out of reach. He was lost in his thoughts, replaying the incident, trying to rationalize Sophia's behavior. Did she see him as a threat? A lesser being? It was exhausting to constantly navigate these perceptions. but he had learned to channel that energy into motivation. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as David considered his next move. He could remain silent as he often had in the past, or he could confront Sophia and challenge her prejudice. The idea of standing up for himself ignited a fire within him, a voice that urged him to speak out against the injustice he faced daily. After all, this was not just about him, it was about every black man who had been belittled or judged based solely on the color of his skin. As they approached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began preparing for meal service. With a practiced smile, one of them approached David. "Would you like the chicken or the pasta, sir?" He chose the pasta, grateful for the distraction. As he ate, he caught sight of Sophia again. She was still engaged in her conversation, now visibly animated, her gestures exaggerated as if to emphasize her disdain for him. It was a scene all too familiar, a racial divide that seemed to manifest in the smallest interactions. With each passing moment, the tension between David and Sophia simmered just below the surface, creating a palpable energy that rippled through the cabin. Other passengers started to take notice, their eyes darting between the two, intrigued by the brewing conflict. It was as if they were spectators at a play, waiting for the climax where characters would finally confront each other. But for David, this was not a performance, it was his reality. He was tired of being an unwilling participant in the narrative of racial prejudice that had plagued his existence for far too long. He had worked hard to achieve his success, and he would not allow someone like Sophia to diminish his accomplishments with her ignorance. Suddenly, a loud thud reverberated through the cabin as the plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing the overhead compartments to rattle. The passengers gasped, and for a brief moment, the atmosphere shifted, binding them together in a shared experience of fear. Sophia's mask of superiority slipped once more as she gripped her armrests, eyes wide with panic. In that instant, something changed within David. It was a reminder that fear knows no color, that vulnerability is universal. He could feel empathy welling up inside him, recognizing the shared humanity that existed despite the divide between them. Perhaps in this moment of crisis there was an opportunity for connection. As the turbulence subsided and the plane steadied, David found himself rising from his seat, propelled by a mix of courage and compassion. He approached Sophia, who was still visibly shaken.
"Hey,"
he said softly, his tone neutral.
"It's okay."
"We're going to be fine." Sophia looked up, surprise washing over her features. For a moment, the wall she had erected between them crumbled. She blinked, uncertainty flickering in her eyes as if she was seeing him for the first time, not as a stranger or an adversary, but as a fellow passenger sharing the same space. "Thanks," she muttered, the edge in her voice softening. It was a small acknowledgement, but for David, it felt monumental. He had crossed a threshold, breaking the cycle of animosity with a simple act of kindness. As he returned to his seat, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. Perhaps this flight would not only be about business, but also about understanding and growth. In the confined space of the airplane, amidst the clouds, they had navigated their own turbulence, one that held the potential for transformation. As the journey continued, David could sense a shift in the air. The tension that had previously dominated the cabin began to dissipate. Other passengers, who had been mere spectators, seemed to absorb the shift as well. Conversations resumed, laughter echoed, and for the first time, a sense of community emerged amidst the diverse group. But as the plane soared higher, David knew this was just the beginning of a journey, not only to his business meeting but also to an encounter that would test the limits of his resolve and the power of human connection. Samuel Carter is a 34-year-old African-American man who embodies resilience and grace under pressure. He stands at 6 feet tall, with an athletic build that speaks to his dedication to fitness. His skin is a deep brown, and he has short, closely cropped hair that accentuates his strong jawline. Samuel's warm hazel eyes reflect a depth of experience and kindness, which he extends to everyone he meets. A successful entrepreneur, Sam runs a consulting firm focused on social justice and diversity training, using his platform to educate others about racial inequality and foster inclusive environments. His passion for social issues stems from his own experiences of prejudice and discrimination, shaping his worldview and igniting a fire within him to advocate for change. Despite his professional accomplishments, Sam has faced challenges that have left scars. Growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, he often felt like an outsider. His childhood was marked by instances of racial bias that taught him early on that society often judges people by the color of their skin. These experiences ignited a desire to uplift those who share similar backgrounds and provide them with opportunities to thrive. He channels this energy into his work, seeking to empower others through mentorship and advocacy. In his personal life, Sam is a caring friend and son, often balancing the demands of work with the need to support his family and friends. He has a close relationship with his younger sister Maya, who looks up to him for guidance. Sam's empathy and compassion extend to his friendships, where he is known for being the dependable one, always ready to lend an ear or offer advice. His passion for travel has allowed him to explore different cultures, further enriching his understanding of diversity. As the story unfolds, Sam's journey will challenge his convictions, forcing him to confront the harsh realities of racism head-on. His character development will illustrate not only his strength, but also his vulnerability, revealing the complexities of navigating a world filled with systemic prejudice. Margaret Lewis, often referred to as Maggie, is a 29-year-old white woman whose striking appearance is matched by her equally strong personality. With long, flowing blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, she stands at 5 feet 7 inches and has an athletic frame, honed from her passion for yoga and fitness. Maggie is a marketing executive at a prestigious firm, known for her ambition and determination to succeed in a male-dominated industry. Her professional life has been marked by hard work and a fierce commitment to her career, but her journey has also been fraught with insecurities and a desire to prove herself. Maggie's upbringing was characterized by privilege. She grew up in a wealthy family that instilled in her a sense of entitlement. However, this privilege has also led to a disconnect with the struggles faced by those less fortunate. Maggie often finds herself grappling with her biases, attempting to reconcile her worldview with the realities of social inequality. Her social circle consists of friends who often echo her sentiments, creating an echo chamber that reinforces her beliefs. Yet beneath her confident exterior lies a sense of vulnerability, as she often feels the pressure to conform to societal expectations of success and perfection. The airplane incident that serves as the catalyst for the narrative acts as a turning point for Maggie. Throughout the story, she will be challenged to confront her ingrained prejudices and reflect on her actions. As she navigates the consequences of her behavior, the audience will witness her internal struggle and growth, ultimately leading to a transformative experience. The journey will force Maggie to reassess her values and the impact of her words and actions on those around her. Dave is Sam's best friend and confidant. At 35 years old, he is a journalist known for his investigative work focused on social issues. His curly black hair and sharp features give him an approachable demeanor, while his intense brown eyes reflect his passion for uncovering the truth. Dave's friendship with Sam is built on shared experiences, and he often provides comic relief in tense situations. His role in the story is pivotal as he encourages Sam to embrace his identity and stand up against injustice, ultimately supporting him during the climax of the narrative. Lydia, a 32-year-old flight attendant, plays a crucial role in the unfolding drama aboard the plane. With her long dark hair and warm smile, she embodies grace under pressure. Lydia's background is one of resilience. She grew up in a mixed-race household, experiencing the complexities of identity firsthand. As a flight attendant, she has witnessed countless interactions between passengers, giving her a unique perspective on human behavior. Her character will serve as a bridge between Sam and Maggie, showcasing how empathy can create connections amidst tension. Nathan, Maggie's younger brother, is a 24-year-old recent college graduate. His character serves as a foil to Maggie, providing a more progressive viewpoint on social issues. With shaggy brown hair and a laid-back style, Ethan is passionate about activism and often challenges Maggie's beliefs. He represents the new generation's understanding of social justice and the importance of allyship, encouraging Maggie to reconsider her stance as the story progresses. As the airplane soared through the skies, the atmosphere inside was a mix of tension and anticipation. Passengers were engrossed in their own worlds, some immersed in movies, others lost in books or conversations. Yet, an undercurrent of discomfort rippled through the cabin, centered around an encounter that was about to unfold. The protagonist, David, a successful businessman with a high-profile career, was returning from a conference. He had always prided himself on his calm demeanor, his ability to navigate both professional and personal challenges with grace. However, today felt different. He sensed an impending storm, not just from the turbulence outside, but from a palpable tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to disrupt the fragile peace within the airplane's confines. Across the aisle sat Sophia, a woman in her late 40s, exuding an air of entitlement. Dressed in designer clothes and with a well-manicured appearance, she looked the part of someone who was used to getting her way. Her eyes darted around the cabin, assessing the other passengers with an almost predatory gaze. The moment her eyes landed on David, a smirk crept onto her lips, a clear indication that she had already formed an opinion about him based solely on his appearance. The challenge began subtly. Sophia leaned over to her travel companion, an equally affluent-looking man, and whispered something that sent a ripple of laughter through them. David tried to focus on his work, but the whispers were hard to ignore. They were loud enough for him to hear snippets, words like suspicious and inappropriate. David's heart sank. He knew what she was implying. This moment was not just a casual incident, it was a microcosm of the societal prejudices that he had faced throughout his life. Despite his accomplishments, he had often found himself battling the stereotypes that came with being a black man in a predominantly white space. He was determined not to let Sophia's disdain ruin his flight, but the constant smirking and side-eye glances were beginning to wear on him. As the flight progressed, Sophia's comments escalated. She began speaking loudly, making sure that everyone around could hear her thinly veiled insults. "I just don't understand how some people think they can sit in business class when they clearly don't belong here," she exclaimed, gesturing towards David. Gasps of surprise echoed from nearby passengers, some looking visibly uncomfortable, while others exchanged knowing glances, as if they were part of an unspoken agreement that David's presence was indeed an anomaly. Feeling the weight of the eyes on him, David's anger simmered just beneath the surface. He had endured microaggressions before, but this was different. This was blatant disrespect in front of an audience. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his accomplishments, his education, and the countless hours he had spent building a life that deserved respect. Yet, Sophia's incessant taunts threatened to unravel the hard-earned confidence he had cultivated over the years. The tipping point came when Sophia stood up abruptly, interrupting the flight attendant as she served drinks. "Excuse me, but can someone explain why this man is seated here?" she said, pointing directly at David. "I demand to know how he got a ticket for this class. It's utterly ridiculous." The cabin fell silent. David felt every eye on him, the weight of judgment heavy in the air. He could see the flight attendant's eyes widen with shock, caught between maintaining decorum and addressing the blatant discrimination happening before her. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said carefully, "everyone here has a right to sit in their assigned seat, and we do not tolerate any form of discrimination on this flight." But Sophia was undeterred. She raised her voice, her face reddening. "You're just enabling this nonsense! It's inappropriate for someone like him to be here. You need to do something about this." Her indignation was theatrical, as if she were performing for the audience she had drawn in. David's pulse quickened. He felt the adrenaline coursing through him, battling the urge to retaliate. He was aware that a confrontation could escalate things further, but the principle of the matter ignited a fire within him. This was not just about him. It was about every person who had ever been marginalized or made to feel inferior. As tensions rose, the flight attendant took a moment to regain her composure. "I will speak to the captain about this situation," she stated firmly, turning away to ensure that proper protocol was followed. Meanwhile, whispers spread like wildfire among the passengers, some defending David silently with supportive nods, while others remained silent, unsure of how to react. In that moment, David realized that the challenge was no longer just Sophia's prejudice. It was about standing up against the tide of complacency that allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. His heart raced with a mixture of anger and determination. This was a fight worth engaging in, not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced similar injustices. The problem before him was twofold: confronting Sophia and addressing the audience that had witnessed this entire spectacle. Would he allow her words to define him, or would he rise above, reclaiming his dignity in the face of prejudice? The stakes were high, and he felt the weight of history bearing down on him as he prepared for the confrontation that lay ahead. As David took a deep breath, the thought crossed his mind. How many times had he allowed similar situations to pass without challenge? How many times had he felt the need to mute his identity in order to blend in? This time would be different. This time, he would not remain silent. With each second that ticked by, the anticipation grew. Would Sophia back down when confronted, or would she dig her heels in deeper? The tension in the cabin was thick, a palpable reminder of the struggle for justice that many had faced. David was not alone in this fight. The unspoken solidarity from fellow passengers was a flicker of hope amidst the looming darkness of discrimination. He could feel the collective breath of the cabin, waiting for him to respond. David knew that how he handled this moment could resonate far beyond the airplane walls. It could serve as a lesson in standing up for what was right, challenging ignorance and advocating for oneself. The moment had arrived, and he was ready to face it head-on, driven by the urgency of the challenge before him. The atmosphere in the airplane grew tense as the confrontation escalated. David took a moment to collect his thoughts, feeling the weight of Sophia's words heavy in the air. He had faced prejudice before, but this was a unique moment that required not just a reaction, but a well-thought-out response. The eyes of the other passengers were upon him, and he realized that this was more than just a personal confrontation. It was a reflection of broader societal issues. "Excuse me," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I believe we need to address what just happened here. Your words are not only offensive, but they also reflect a deeper issue in our society that we need to confront. It's not just about me being here, it's about all of us learning to respect each other, regardless of our backgrounds." A ripple of surprise went through the cabin. Some passengers shifted in their seats, intrigued by David's bravery. He saw a few heads nodding in agreement, their eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope. This moment could be transformative, not just for him, but for those who had witnessed the unjust situation unfolding. Sophia, momentarily taken aback, straightened her posture. "Oh, please, spare me your lecture. You're here, in my way, and you don't belong in this class. Why should I have to tolerate you?" The dismissive tone in her voice ignited something in David. "What do you mean I don't belong here? I've worked hard to be where I am, just like you. My presence here is not an affront to you, it's a testament to the fact that we all have the right to be in spaces that might have previously excluded us." He could feel the tension building, it was palpable. He could sense that he wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. His voice rose slightly, infused with passion and a sense of purpose. "This isn't just about seating assignments or ticket classes, it's about recognizing our humanity. You see me, a black man in a suit, and you make assumptions, but here I am, ready to confront ignorance in the face of your prejudice." As the words poured out, David felt a release of pent-up emotions. He spoke not only for himself but also for those who had felt marginalized, silenced, or dismissed. Every word he articulated resonated deeply with the passengers who were listening intently. It was almost as if he had opened a floodgate of shared experiences, stories waiting to be told. The atmosphere shifted from one of discomfort to empowerment, with a sense of camaraderie building among those who had silently witnessed Sophia's insults. Suddenly, a woman from a few rows back stood up. "You're right. It's about time we address this kind of behavior. We can't just sit here and let someone bully another person because of their race." "This is ridiculous!" Her voice, strong and unwavering, echoed through the cabin. Applause erupted, and it took David by surprise. The flight attendant, sensing the momentum shifting, returned to the aisle, her demeanor more assertive. "I understand there's a situation here that needs addressing. I want to assure everyone that we take these matters seriously. We do not tolerate discrimination on this flight or anywhere else." David felt the tide turning. He could see that the passengers who had once been silent were now engaged, many shaking their heads in disbelief at Sophia's outburst. The solidarity was palpable, with some people sharing nods of encouragement, and it spurred him on. He felt emboldened to continue. "Thank you," he said, directing his gratitude toward the woman who had spoken up. "It's important to remember that these moments of truth are what pave the way for change. Every time we stand up against discrimination, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who has faced prejudice." Sophia, realizing the tide had turned against her, shifted uneasily in her seat. Her confidence began to waver. "This is absurd," she muttered under her breath, trying to maintain her composure. But the growing chorus of support from other passengers drowned her out. In that moment, David chose to turn his attention to the other passengers. "We all come from different backgrounds. Our experiences shape who we are. I'm a businessman, a father, a community member, and I refuse to let anyone define my worth based on the color of my skin. We must all strive for a world where we uplift each other instead of tearing one another down." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of solidarity. "Exactly! We're all human. We have to support each other. Enough is enough." Each shout of agreement built upon the last, transforming the airplane cabin into a microcosm of a larger conversation about race, identity, and respect. As the conversation unfolded, David began to share his story, a narrative that was familiar to many, yet unique to him. He spoke of his upbringing, the struggles he faced growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and the barriers he encountered while striving for success in a competitive corporate world. He recounted the first time he realized the impact of racism on his life, a pivotal moment that solidified his resolve to fight against it. His words were not just about him, they were a shared experience that resonated with the audience. As he spoke, David could see faces nodding in recognition, empathy shining in their eyes. The passengers were no longer mere observers. They had become participants in a collective awakening. The flight attendant, returning with the captain, stood poised to address the escalating situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "we understand there's been a serious issue of disrespect occurring. We want to assure you that we are taking immediate action. Discrimination of any kind is unacceptable." The captain's presence added gravity to the situation. "I want to thank Mr. David for his courage in speaking up. It takes strength to confront these injustices, and we must always remember that we're stronger together. This is a safe space for all passengers, regardless of race, gender, or background." With that, the cabin erupted into applause once again. David felt a swell of emotion, his heart racing. He realized that the confrontation with Sophia had transformed into an opportunity for change, not just for himself, but for everyone aboard. The dynamic had shifted, and as Sophia sat back in her seat, her expression was one of disbelief. The realization that her words had sparked a powerful reaction from the passengers enveloped her in an uncomfortable silence. The narrative had moved from one of individual prejudice to a collective stand against injustice. "Thank you, everyone," David said, his voice steadying as he looked around the cabin. "Let's use this moment as a reminder that we can make a difference. We all have the power to challenge prejudice, and every time we do, we pave the way for a more inclusive world. It's time we work together to build bridges, not walls." As the applause subsided, a sense of unity filled the cabin. The passengers shared glances, smiles, and nods of understanding. The flight attendant moved through the aisle, serving drinks and chatting with passengers who were now energized by the exchange. The once quiet flight had transformed into a vibrant discussion about social justice and the importance of standing up against discrimination. David felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was more than just a confrontation. It had evolved into a moment of empowerment. He had faced the challenge head-on and turned it into an opportunity for dialogue. The airplane, typically a place of isolation, had become a platform for change. As they approached their destination, the plane's descent began. David looked around, witnessing the shared camaraderie amongst the passengers. A sense of hope hung in the air, proof that even in the most challenging of circumstances, change was possible. As the confrontation between David and Sophia unfolded, the passengers in the airplane cabin were drawn into the drama, each processing the events in their own unique way. Some were mere observers, while others felt compelled to react, each response adding a layer to the complex emotional tapestry that was developing around them. A young woman sitting 2 rows ahead, Sarah, felt her heart race as she listened to David's impassioned words. She had never been one to speak up, often feeling overshadowed in conversations by louder voices. However, witnessing this incident stirred something within her. She recalled moments from her own life where she had experienced discrimination, albeit in different forms. Turning to her seatmate, an elderly man named Gerald, she whispered, "This is unbelievable. I can't believe how brave he is to confront her like that." Gerald, who had initially appeared uninterested, nodded in agreement. "It takes a lot of courage," he said. "I've seen things like this happen, but no one ever stands up. It's about time someone did." Encouraged by David's strength, Sarah felt emboldened. When David spoke of shared humanity and the importance of respect, she found herself nodding along, her heart swelling with pride for him. This wasn't just his fight, it was a collective stand against prejudice. As David continued, Sarah felt an urge to add her voice to the mix, sensing that the moment was ripe for change. "Excuse me," she called out, surprising herself with her boldness. "I want to support what you're saying." We all deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who we are. This isn't just about race, it's about humanity. The cabin grew silent as heads turned in her direction, and a ripple of murmurs began to swell. The flight attendant, noticing the shift, stepped in to encourage the passengers. "Thank you for speaking up. It's vital that we all recognize these issues and support one another. Let's make this a safe space for everyone." The applause that followed reinforced the sense of solidarity that was building in the cabin. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who had been quietly observing, felt a surge of motivation. She had witnessed her share of injustices over the years, but often remained passive, convinced that her voice wouldn't matter. But David's courage resonated with her, and she felt a pang of guilt for not having acted similarly in her own life. "You're right," she exclaimed. It's not just about what's happening here. It's about taking a stand in our daily lives. We should always challenge racism, even if it's uncomfortable. The encouragement grew, and several passengers joined in, expressing their thoughts. A man in a business suit chimed in, "I can't believe we still have to deal with this. We're better than this." His words seemed to ignite a fire in those around him, prompting more to share their agreement. In the back, a group of teenagers, initially distracted by their phones, now sat up straighter, watching the confrontation unfold with rapt attention. They had grown up in a time when discussions around race were becoming more commonplace, and the social justice movements had informed their perspectives. One of them, Jason, finally broke the silence. "This is so messed up. People need to realize that judging someone based on their skin color is just ignorant." Their perspective brought a fresh energy to the conversation, emphasizing that the younger generation was ready to challenge outdated mindsets. The flight attendant made her way toward them, beaming at their engagement. "Exactly, you all are the future, and your voices are so important. It's crucial that you continue to speak out against injustice." As the discussion flourished, the initial tension morphed into a sense of empowerment among the passengers. David, buoyed by the support, continued to speak, his voice steady and resonant. "This moment is just a reflection of what many face daily. We must remember that we are not defined by the prejudices of others, but by our actions and our commitment to equality." Sophia, feeling increasingly isolated, attempted to retort but was drowned out by the growing chorus of support for David. The passengers had formed an unspoken agreement to stand with him, and the atmosphere shifted from one of hostility to one of unity and strength. The flight attendants circulated, asking passengers if they'd like to share their own experiences with discrimination. The resulting discussions varied widely, with stories of personal encounters surfacing. Each narrative underscored the commonality of the struggle against prejudice and highlighted the resilience of those who faced it. As stories were shared, laughter and tears mingled, and the cabin became a sanctuary of understanding. A young mother spoke of how she had moved to a diverse neighborhood to provide her children with the rich tapestry of experiences that came with cultural diversity. Her children listened intently, recognizing the importance of the conversations unfolding around them. In another part of the cabin, a veteran passenger, David, shared how he had fought for civil rights decades earlier. "It's disheartening to see how far we've come, but also how far we have to go," he said, his voice quivering with emotion. "We've fought battles, but it's clear the fight continues. We must remain vigilant." With each voice that rose in support of David, Sophia's isolation deepened. The realization that she was losing the argument, both publicly and personally, weighed heavily on her. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting around the cabin, desperately seeking support but finding only disapproval. The camaraderie among the passengers was palpable. They exchanged stories, fostering a sense of community that transcended the initial conflict. One passenger shared how his family had come from a different country, facing discrimination upon arrival. He spoke about the importance of understanding others' experiences to foster empathy and respect. David noticed that even some of the crew members were engaged in the discussions, nodding along and occasionally chiming in with their thoughts. The cabin had transformed into a microcosm of societal reflection, a space where barriers were dismantled through shared experiences. As the plane began its descent, the conversation continued to flow, and the atmosphere was electric with newfound hope. Passengers exchanged contact information, promising to stay connected and continue the dialogue beyond the flight. There was an air of determination that perhaps, just perhaps, the seeds planted during this unexpected confrontation could grow into something greater. "I want to thank each and every one of you for standing up today," David said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Together, we have created a moment that transcends this flight. It's a reminder that we can make a difference, that we can stand together against injustice." As they prepared for landing, the sense of community lingered, and the passengers began to look around, seeing one another not as strangers, but as allies. Each had played a part in transforming an uncomfortable situation into a powerful lesson about unity and resilience. David felt a rush of emotion as the plane touched down. He had faced a personal challenge, but had also become part of something bigger than himself, a movement toward understanding, empathy, and action. The connections forged during the flight would carry beyond the airplane, inspiring those who had witnessed the unfolding drama to take action in their own lives. As they disembarked, passengers exchanged warm smiles and acknowledgments. It was a moment of celebration, not just for overcoming a confrontation, but for embracing a shared commitment to fight against prejudice. David stepped into the terminal, invigorated by the experience, knowing that the journey toward justice was far from over, but hopeful that this moment had planted the seeds for future change. As the confrontation escalated, a palpable tension filled the cabin, transforming the airplane into a stage for a dramatic conflict. The air was thick with anticipation. Passengers leaned in, straining to catch every word, while the flight attendants exchanged concerned glances, aware that they were witnessing an incident far beyond the usual in flight quarrels. David stood tall, his posture unwavering, as he faced Sophia, her brow furrowed, a mixture of indignation and confusion playing across her face. It was as if time had suspended itself, and everyone aboard the flight was momentarily united in this shared experience, drawn into the unfolding drama. The typical sounds of the airplane, engines humming, flight announcements crackling, faded into the background, leaving only the tension-filled dialogue echoing through the cabin. "Why should you even care?" Sophia snapped, her voice rising, exposing the defensiveness lurking beneath her veneer of superiority. "This is just how it is. People need to understand their place." Her words hung in the air, igniting a spark of anger in the other passengers. There was an unspoken agreement among them. This wasn't just about David and Sophia anymore. It was about standing against a deeper societal issue that many had faced in various forms. David, determined to reclaim the narrative, took a deep breath. "No, it's not just how it is. It's how you want it to be, and that's the problem." His voice rang with conviction, each syllable carefully chosen to cut through the tension and resonate with those who had been silently observing. He felt a surge of energy from the passengers around him, their attention fully captured as they hung on his words. The atmosphere shifted as whispers spread among the passengers. Some shook their heads in disbelief at Sophia's remarks, while others exchanged nods of solidarity toward David. This collective reaction only served to heighten the stakes. It became clear that this was no longer a simple argument. It was a microcosm of the larger struggles against racism and injustice that permeated society. Sophia's eyes darted around the cabin, her bravado beginning to crumble under the weight of the scrutiny. "You're just making a scene," she shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. "What do you expect to gain from this?" "You think people care?" The defiance in her voice was fading, replaced by a hint of desperation as she realized that her views were not only being challenged but publicly scrutinized. The tension reached a breaking point as a man sitting nearby, Jonathan, finally decided to intervene. "You're wrong, ma'am," he said firmly, his voice steady and resolute. "We do care. We care about justice, equality, and treating each other like human beings. This isn't just about you and him. It's about everyone who has ever felt marginalized or devalued." It became clear that this was no longer a simple argument. It was a microcosm of the larger struggles against racism and injustice that permeated society. Sophia's eyes darted around the cabin, her bravado beginning to crumble under the weight of the scrutiny. "You're just making a scene," she shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. "What do you expect to gain from this?" "You think people care?" The defiance in her voice was fading, replaced by a hint of desperation as she realized that her views were not only being challenged but publicly scrutinized. The tension reached a breaking point as a man sitting nearby, Jonathan, finally decided to intervene. "You're wrong, ma'am," he said firmly, his voice steady and resolute. "We do care. We care about justice, equality, and treating each other like human beings. This isn't just about you and him. It's about everyone who has ever felt marginalized or devalued." His words reverberated through the cabin, adding fuel to the fire of collective outrage. Sophia, visibly rattled, attempted to regain her composure. "This is just ridiculous. I can say whatever I want. It's a free country." But her declaration sounded increasingly hollow, echoing the sentiments of a fragile argument that was falling apart. The passengers, united in their discontent, began to voice their agreement with Jonathan, a chorus of supportive murmurs rising in the cabin. "Your freedom of speech doesn't give you the right to demean others," another passenger, Maria, called out from the back. "We're all entitled to our opinions, but your words are rooted in hate. That's not okay." Her voice was calm yet powerful, cutting through the chaos and bringing focus back to the core issue at hand. The flight attendants, sensing the growing unrest, exchanged hurried whispers, unsure of how to proceed. They knew they had to intervene, but they also understood that this was more than just an in-flight dispute. It was an opportunity for collective change. One of them, a young attendant named Priya, approached the front of the cabin, her expression determined. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is an intense situation," she began, her voice carrying a calming authority. We want to ensure everyone feels safe and respected on this flight." David seized the moment. "That's exactly it. We should all feel safe. This isn't about a debate, it's about respect for one another." His eyes scanned the cabin, looking for allies among the passengers. The atmosphere, once charged with animosity, was beginning to transform into a space of solidarity and understanding. A sense of urgency permeated the cabin as David continued. "We can't let ignorance dictate our interactions. Every single person on this plane has the right to be treated with dignity." His conviction resonated deeply with the passengers, who now seemed to lean forward in their seats, drawn into the powerful moment unfolding before them. As Sophia tried to regain her footing, she blurted out, "I'm not a bad person. I just speak my mind." But the desperation in her voice was apparent, and it only deepened the divide between her and the others who had united in support of David. The passengers, many of whom had lived through similar experiences of discrimination or witnessed it in various forms, were no longer willing to accept such viewpoints quietly. The airplane cabin, typically a neutral space of travel, had become a battlefield of ideologies, with David at the forefront of the fight for respect and equality. The tension was palpable, each heartbeat echoing the collective resolve to stand against injustice. Then, David took a bold step forward, creating a tangible connection with his audience. "Look around you," he urged. "This isn't just a flight. These are our fellow human beings, each with their stories, struggles, and dreams. We're not so different. We all want to be seen, heard, and respected." The sincerity in his voice reverberated through the cabin, igniting a shared sense of purpose among the passengers. A ripple of agreement flowed through the crowd. Some passengers nodded, others murmured affirmations. It was as if David's words had unlocked a door, allowing everyone to step into a shared understanding that transcended the immediate confrontation. They were no longer just witnesses, they were participants in a powerful movement for change. Yet, Sophia clung desperately to her perspective, unwilling to let go of her entrenched beliefs. "You're all being ridiculous! This isn't how things work!" she exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch as she felt cornered. The frustration and fear of losing her grip on the conversation fueled her defensiveness, but her words fell flat against the growing tide of support for David. The passengers, emboldened by his courage, began to respond to her with empathy rather than anger. "You're entitled to your opinion," a woman in her 50s interjected calmly. "But that doesn't mean we have to accept it." "We all have a responsibility to challenge hate when we see it." The escalating exchange drew attention from fellow travelers who were now fully engaged in the dialogue. Some passengers began sharing their own experiences with racism, each story adding weight to the collective narrative. The tension was palpable, but so was the determination to foster understanding in a space that had, until now, been defined by conflict. With each new voice that emerged in support of David, Sophia's defenses crumbled further. She could feel the isolation settling in, the weight of her words pressing down on her. It was as if the cabin had transformed into a living entity, breathing in the solidarity of the moment while exhaling the staleness of ignorance. Suddenly, the aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, jostling the passengers and breaking the tension momentarily. Laughter erupted, lightening the atmosphere. "Maybe it's a sign we need to buckle up for this conversation," Jonathan joked, easing the discomfort with humor. The cabin erupted into laughter, creating a brief respite from the heated exchange. Yet, as the laughter faded, the serious undertones returned, more resolute than ever. David seized the moment. "This is about more than just today. This is about creating a culture of respect, not just here, but everywhere we go." His gaze moved over the faces of his fellow passengers, each person reflecting their commitment to change. It's about challenging the systems that allow hate to flourish. The passengers felt a shared sense of duty. They were no longer just witnesses. They were united in their resolve to advocate for change, committed to fostering a future where respect and dignity prevailed. In that moment, it became clear that the airplane was more than a mode of transport. It had transformed into a vessel of collective consciousness, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of all who were aboard. As the aircraft continued its course, the turbulence had not only been of the physical variety, it had shaken the very foundations of the passengers' beliefs and biases. David, now more determined than ever, recognized that the confrontation with Sophia was not just a singular event. It was a catalyst for broader discussions that would extend far beyond this flight. The building tension had become a powerful force for change, igniting conversations that would resonate long after they disembarked. David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just defending himself, but also advocating for a brighter future for everyone. The fight for respect and understanding was just beginning, and he was ready to lead the charge. In that moment, the passengers became more than just individuals. They were a collective force, embodying the change they wished to see in the world. The airplane was not merely a vessel for travel, but a platform for justice, unity, and hope. The air was electric as the conversation between David and Sophia reached a boiling point, transforming the airplane cabin into an arena where the stakes felt higher than ever. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, hearts racing, each person fully aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment. The flight attendants had retreated momentarily, allowing the confrontation to unfold without interruption. This was not merely an argument, it was a confrontation of ideologies, a clash between hate and love, ignorance and understanding. As David gathered his thoughts, he noticed Sophia's face, flushed with anger and desperation. Her tightly clenched fists signaled her struggle to maintain control over the situation. "You think you can just come in here and preach to me about respect?" Sophia snapped, her voice shaky yet defiant. "I have my rights, just like you." Her words hung in the air, a challenge laced with bitterness. "Rights don't give you the license to demean others," David countered, his voice steady and calm. "It's about recognizing that our freedom ends where another person's dignity begins." His conviction resonated deeply with the surrounding passengers who were feeling the urgency of the moment. This was not just about them, it was about all those who had suffered under the weight of prejudice and discrimination. The tension mounted as David took a step closer to Sophia, his gaze unwavering. "You're making a choice to perpetuate a cycle of hate, but it's time to break that cycle." The weight of his words hung heavy in the cabin, prompting a ripple of murmurs among the passengers. This was a moment that would define not only their flight, but also the ongoing fight for justice and equality. Sophia's bravado began to wane as she faced the collective gaze of her fellow passengers. "I'm not a bad person! I don't see it that way," she protested, her voice cracking. The defensive posture she had maintained was unraveling, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability that resonated with the audience. They weren't just watching a confrontation, they were witnessing a soul grappling with its beliefs. At this moment, the true climax of the confrontation revealed itself. David, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped back to let the words settle. "Maybe you don't see it that way," he said gently, his tone shifting from confrontational to compassionate. "But what if you tried to understand where I'm coming from? What if you opened your heart to the possibility that your experiences don't define everyone else's?" A heavy silence enveloped the cabin as Sophia struggled to find her footing. The passengers were leaning into the conversation, some nodding in agreement, others whispering to one another in hushed tones. The shift in dynamic was palpable. They were no longer passive observers, but active participants in a dialogue that transcended the immediate situation. David was not merely defending himself, he was challenging everyone present to reflect on their own beliefs and biases. It was as if a dam had broken. Several passengers began to share their own stories, each voice adding weight to David's plea for understanding. "I grew up in a neighborhood where I was judged by my skin color," a woman in her early 30s revealed, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Every day was a reminder that my worth was measured by something I couldn't control. We have to do better." Another passenger chimed in, "I've seen it too. My best friend is black, and I've watched him navigate a world that doesn't always see him for who he is. It's heartbreaking." Their voices melded together, forming a powerful chorus of shared experiences, each testimony amplifying the urgency of the moment. Sophia's defenses crumbled further as she absorbed the weight of these revelations. "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I thought it was okay to say what I felt." The realization that her words had repercussions began to settle in, igniting a flicker of empathy that had been absent moments before. David seized the opportunity. "It's okay to feel," he reassured her. "We all have our thoughts and experiences, but we have to ask ourselves, are they hurting others? Words can be weapons, and we have the power to choose how we wield them." His calm demeanor created a safe space for dialogue, encouraging the passengers and Sophia to confront uncomfortable truths. The tension shifted from hostility to vulnerability as Sophia wrestled with her emotions. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I just thought I was being honest." The admission hung in the air, a small but significant step toward understanding. The passengers, witnessing this transformation, felt a sense of hope begin to blossom in the shared space of the cabin. Yet, not everyone was ready to let go of the past. A voice from the back broke the momentary silence. "You can't just apologize and think it's over." A middle-aged man, clearly upset, stood up, his expression fierce. "You can't erase the damage done by your words." His challenge added a layer of complexity to the emotional landscape of the cabin. Tension began to resurface, threatening to derail the progress made just moments before. David turned to the man, his expression one of understanding. "You're right. It's not enough to just apologize. We need to do better, not just for ourselves, but for each other." He stepped toward the man, creating a bridge between their differing perspectives. "This isn't just about one person, it's about a culture that needs to change." The man's brow furrowed, uncertainty evident in his eyes. "How do we change it? How do we make sure this doesn't keep happening?" His voice was filled with frustration, and the question resonated with everyone in the cabin. They were all grappling with the reality that change would require more than words. It would demand action. "Change starts here, with each of us," David replied, his voice steady. "It's about listening, learning, and speaking out against hate when we see it. It's about supporting each other, standing together." The atmosphere shifted once again, this time toward a collective commitment to engage in meaningful change. The realization dawned on the passengers that they were not merely witnesses to a confrontation, they were part of a movement. Sophia, witnessing the solidarity that was emerging, took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't realize the impact of my words. I didn't think." Her vulnerability opened the floodgates for more conversations, each passenger reflecting on their experiences and the lessons they could learn from one another. "Thank you for saying that," David encouraged, sensing the power of her acknowledgement. "We all have the capacity to grow, to learn from our mistakes. It's what we do after that counts." The cabin, once filled with tension, now resonated with a collective determination to move forward together. The climax of the confrontation wasn't just a moment of conflict, it had transformed into a moment of profound understanding. The passengers were no longer isolated in their experiences, but were united in their commitment to challenge hate and advocate for change. It was a pivotal moment that would echo long after the flight had ended. As the airplane soared through the skies, a new chapter was being written, not just for David and Sophia, but for everyone on board. They were embarking on a journey toward empathy and understanding, where the lessons learned during this flight would ripple out into their lives and communities. The air of resolve enveloped the cabin as David turned to the passengers, his voice filled with hope. "Let's carry this moment with us, not just for today, but for every day moving forward. Let's be the voices for change, the advocates for justice. Together, we can create a world where respect reigns." With those words, the passengers embraced a new sense of purpose, their hearts open to the possibility of change, and their spirits ready to fight against the tides of ignorance and hatred that had long persisted. The flight had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that within every moment of conflict lies the potential for growth and understanding, waiting to be seized by those willing to engage in the dialogue. As we reflect on this powerful incident aboard the plane, let's consider how we can all play a role in fighting against racism and injustice in our everyday lives. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How can we foster understanding and support one another in our communities? Together, we can make a difference.